Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Red Hour, a show I do twice a week where I where I throw a little chaos into Star Trek by reviewing a random episode. And I do this on Wednesdays and Thursdays at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for anyone that is new. Today's random episode is from the original series, Season 1, Episode 8, Balance of Terror. Now, of course, this is a classic that I would say any person that's interested in Star Trek or has ever seen Star Trek should definitely if you've seen it, then I think most people are in agreement that it's a great episode. If you haven't seen it, I think it's a must see episode if you're just getting into Star Trek. So it begins with there's a wedding ceremony about to begin, and Kirk is about to marry this couple. He's as per naval tradition that the captain can marry people. When Spock comes on the speaker and says that an an outpost along the neutral zone has been destroyed, and that I think he says Outpost 2, and I think he also mentions that Outpost 3 was also destroyed or about to be destroyed, and that the next target would be Outpost 4. And so Kirk ends goes to calls for a red alert, and the wedding is unfortunately postponed. So that's our teaser, and then um, Kirk does a captain's log where he explains the neutral zone, and it's between the Federation and the Romulans and the Remans, and that Outpost 4 is under attack. And he also goes on to explain that that 100 years ago prior, uh, there was a war between Earth and their allies and the Romulans. I don't know if they're named the Romulan Empire at this point. I believe they are, but they were using primitive atomic weapons. No human or human allies had seen the Romulans, and the Romulans had never seen the humans. But there was a treaty that created this neutral zone. They used subspace communications to create this treaty, and I think it was like 120 years ago. Anyway, as we know, find out later, it would be during the time of Enterprise. Um, so he also goes on to inform the crew that of their mission that he had previously not told them about, that they're seeking. Basically, it's a reconnaissance mission, and they are considered expendable. They are not to fire on any ships that they are allowed to defend themselves, but they are not to be the aggressors, and they're again supposedly just doing a reconnaissance mission. So I guess Starfleet Command had known about this activity in the area prior. So there's a on in the navigation seat is a officer named Styles, and he talks about how his family, he has family members that were in that war, and they were killed in that war. And Kirk says that that was their war, not ours. And because Styles is pretty gung ho on trying to, go after these Romulans. And so he's so then they get information about Outpost 3, and it, which all of these outposts are like on asteroids or meteors or whatever, and they're built like deep inside of them. And uh, they get the information that Outpost 3 has now been pulverized, shattered to dust. And Kirk orders all weapons energized. And then we get a communications from Outpost 4, and they don't have any deflector shields, and they cannot indicate what hit them. They saw it briefly. It was a ship, obviously a ship, but they weren't able to identify it, and it basically disappeared somehow. And he again tells Kirk that they're like miles deep inside of an asteroid. So he is flabbergasted as to how this ship would penetrate, that far deep into the asteroid. So the Enterprise arrives near Outpost 4, and we see the ship uncloaks. And I think Styles at one point does say that you would be able to recognize them if they're Romulan, because of they have markings of like a bird of prey on the underbelly of the hull. And I see DJ Play Nice is here. Hello, DJ Play Nice. Then the bird of prey, the Romulan bird of prey, starts to approach Outpost 4 again. And Kirk tells Uhura to send out a message to not approach. And she says that she had already done that, and that there's no response. And Styles points out that there could be spies. They basically end up destroying Outpost 4, and you see the guy briefly, and then they're destroyed on screen. So Styles points out that there could be some spies on board, and then Sulu agrees, and then they should go to security alert. And then Uhura begins to pick up some sort of communications, but it's like scrambled. So she tries to Kirk tells her to try to unscramble it, and she's able to do so. And she says that it's coded, I guess. Scrambled. I use the word scrambled. Sorry. So they put it on view screen, and the people on the ship look like Vulcans. Now we already, spoiler alert, the Romulans look like Vulcans. And then Styles starts to say something about Spock and how he should be able to translate what they're saying. And Kirk says, and it basically says it under his breath. And Kirk says, "What did you say?" And he says, "Nothing, sir." And Kirk tells Styles that I want to make one thing clear: leave your bigotry on the bridge. Now, I hate to kind of get into this, but this comes up all of the time. All of the time. Non-stop. It came up a week ago, I think, on the Critical Drinkers open bar show, which, speaking of the Critical Drinker, there's a big story going on about how he had Andy Weir as in an interview, and then Andy Weir said something about how Kurtzman's Trek sucks, and then had to walk it back a little bit, and that's become a big stink among the wokey wokes, because how dare Andy Weir even entertain the idea of going to talk to Critical Drinker. But anyway, Critical Drinker brought up that how Kurtzman Trek, and we've talked about this to death. I was going to use the Roman in if affinite. I can't say it, so I'm not going to use it. But it's been talked to death about how modern politics is kind of shoved down our throats in Kurtzman Trek, and people will always bring up this and A Private Little War, and let that be your last battlefield, in certain things, where this line that Kirk says is, I won't allow bigotry on my bridge. It's a very quick line. I don't even think what Styles said was even remotely racist. It maybe implies some racism. But these days, that's all you have to do is sort of imply racist, and therefore you're a Nazi and a bigot, and it's the phobe and whatnot. It's a very quick line, and it doesn't take away from the story. It doesn't. That's not the whole focus of the story. There's a couple of more instances where Styles says some things and blah blah blah, and he's kind of bitter and whatever. But it's not like, hey, you need to respect my pronouns, and you need to, and we're gonna focus, 2 episodes on how gay I am and blah blah blah, or whatever. I don't know. Pick your battle, whatever it may be. So but they'll always bring this up as like Star Trek was always woke. And then there was that quote from Shatner: "Star Trek was always woke," which Shatner isn't in charge of that account. I think most people believe that. Even if he did, he's 95 years old and doesn't understand that what we're talking about. Woke and progressiveness, you being progressive or saying don't be a racist, it's not the same thing. It's when you have all this like girl boss stuff, and like women are better than men, and they can beat up, they're 110 pounds but can beat up like big you know Dwayne Johnson type people, things like that, and or the man has to be put down in order to prop the woman up, or you're focusing all about your. I mean, again, I've talked about this 1,000 billion gazillion times. It's not the same. They will say that it's the same and it's always been the same and it's not the same, and then when you point out the difference, they just ignore it and try to um, conflate the two. And DJ Plays Night says, yeah, there's a difference between woke and aware. Yes. They think that because there's an episode of the original series where one of the flag officers is black, um, that's the same thing. You know, no, he was black. Nobody said shit. Nobody gave a shit. It wasn't like I'm black and you have to respect me being my blackness, and everything. My whole entire identity is wrapped around me being black, like the whole thing with like Black Snape and all the race swapping and all the other shit that they do. And it's getting old. I'll tell you that. But that one line is therein. I don't want bigotry on my bridge. Is there one line to say it's always woke? It was always woke. Uh, anyway, rant over, because you can't have an episode of the Red Hour without a rant, because the Red Hour is a time of chaos anyway. So then Uhura translates what they're saying and records it and gives it to Spock. And then Sulu says that the ship is in range, and they have like a visual on it, so they're not cloaked yet. And then Kirk says to follow the ship, and then they cloak. So he's got their trajectory. He's telling Sulu to stay within range, but keep your distance, basically. And then we see on board the ship, which I don't think in the original series we see this a lot, where we see the other perspective of the aliens. Where one of the junior officers comes up to the commander and asks, why don't we attack them, or why doesn't the Enterprise attack them? Sorry, got that wrong. And he says probably to study the enemy. And then you see another guy says something, and the commander says that you broke your silence. We were supposed to be silent, and you broke that silence, and it was careless of you to do that. And he demotes him by 2 ranks, to where his friend comes up to him and says to be careful, because this guy has friends in power. And they're talking about the Praetor, and they allude to the Senate. I don't think they really mentioned the Senate by name, but basically it kind of sets up the Romulans as like these cutthroat Romanesque type people. So then he calls for evasive new maneuvers, and basically his mission is to he wants to show the Praetor the proof of like the Earthman's weaknesses. That's what he says. They're trying to find out their weaknesses. So then on the conference room, Kirk is asking for suggestions, what they should do. Styles immediately says that they should attack. Bones says that's not a good idea. We don't know the situation is. We don't know why they're here. And Styles says they've already attacked 3 outposts, and he's like basically saying, I know these Romulans, I know how they are because his family had fought in the Romulan War. They're not going to stop. They're going to attack us. We should attack them first. And then Spock agrees and says to Styles says something else to Spock about how he had concealed the fact that they were Vulcan offshoots, which Spock didn't know that exactly 100%, but he suspects so, and he suggests to attack them as to kind of sort of like a preemptive strike. Now, here comes incoming rant. Another incoming rant. The first episode of Discovery, and this is where people are going to justify this, right? The first episode of this Discovery is called The Vulcan Hello. And in that episode, Michael Burnham is suggesting to Captain Georgiou to preemptively strike on the Romulans, or the Klingons. Because that's what the Vulcans did, because that's the only way they kind of respond to first contact situations. And people are going to say, well, in Balance of Terror, Spock said that we should attack the Romulans and da 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 da. Well, the difference is that Georgiou turned that plan down, and Burnham mutinied and started a whole entire war to basically say, I'm right, you're wrong. I'm a black woman who's smarter than you. I don't care what you say, Captain. And so that's a major difference that they seem to not get. I think they get it, but they can't admit that they're wrong, because these shows are their that's my representation. These are the people that I want to see in myself. So if they admit that that's wrong, they admit that the whole concept of the show is wrong, and then their whole world collapses, basically. And that's why we have all these online fights. It's never going to end until either Kurtzman is gone and somebody takes over and does proper Star Trek, or the pendulum swings to the point to where they have no choice but to admit, oh yeah, that didn't really turn out so well, did it? And even if, let's say, and so Kirk agrees with Spock. He takes Spock's suggestion. Let's say that Kirk had not agreed with Spock. Spock would not have mutinied against Kirk and took over the ship and started a war. Like, there's a huge difference there. Anyway, on the bridge, there's a comet entering this system, and the Kirk asks, Spock an obvious question: don't most comets have a tail? He says yes, and wouldn't that be basically a good place to hide? And he says yes. So they change course and go towards the comet, to where the Romulan ship also does the same, and it's their plan to hide inside the tail of the comet. The problem is once they do that, they will become visible, which Kirk knows that, because they have to expend to extend their shields because it takes up all of their power to use the cloaking device. So the Romulan ship begins to hide in the comet's tail, and Kirk says that we're going to go around the comet to the other side and swoop in that way. And one of the Centurions says that the Enterprise is changing course. And the commander realizes that Kirk knows about their plan and orders an escape maneuver. And basically he says to them, and so the ship turns suddenly and says to them that Kirk had guessed their move. So Kirk approaches the comet from the other side, and then they do not see the Romulan ship. So he realizes that they had guessed his move as well. So he says that I won't make that same mistake twice, and he orders Sulu to fire. Basically, they're firing in the dark, but Kirk kind of has an idea of where the ship is, so he fires on them, and he fires twice and makes 2 hits. So the Romulan commander diverts all power to weapons, and then they fire back, and it damages part of their control circuit to where Spock has to begin repairs. So the Romulan ship fires another, like a torpedo, and it's approaching it's at close proximity, and it's approaching the Enterprise, and it begins by, they have 2 minutes, and if Spock can't get these repairs done in 2 minutes, they won't have phasers. It's still quickly approaching them, and then Sulu says that they now have 10 seconds, and then it starts to dissipate. So it hits the ship, but there's little damage done. To which Kirk realizes that that their weapons have a range limit, or a limited range. So then he says to go back. He says that they're going back to they're resuming their old course, and Kirk tells Sulu to do the same thing as before. Follow them, keep your distance, don't fire on them. And the Romulan ship begins to enter the neutral zone. And this is when Kirk realizes that cloaking takes up all of their energy. So they can't, this is basically when they establish that, you can't fire while cloaked. I guess that's the Klingons. But anyway, the cloaking takes up all their energy. So Kirk fires in the dark again, and they get hit again, and the Romulan ship proceeds to go into the Romulan side of the neutral zone, to where Kirk tells Uhura to inform Starfleet Command that they're going to proceed into the neutral zone. And then they're questioning why don't we, the Romulan Centurion is questioning why don't we fire, why don't we destroy the Enterprise, why don't we fire upon them, this is our chance, we can make our Praetor proud, and you know, different things like that. And the Romulan commander basically says that he's trying to make us waste energy, that we're just going to proceed back into Romulan space, and tells them to put some debris. Oh, and on that last volley, one of his closest commanders and closest friends had been killed. So he tells the Centurion to take some debris and put them into the escape pods. He calls them tubes, abandonment tubes or something like that. Escape pods. And tells to put the body of his friend into the escape pod as well, or the debris tubes or whatever. And it basically confuses the censors to where Spock realizes this and says that it's basically a trick on their part, and now they've lost track of the Romulan ship. So the Enterprise goes to full stop, and they believe that the Romulan ship has done the same and is close by. 9 hours and 42 minutes pass by, and Yeoman Rand, enters Kirk's quarters because he's taking a break, and offers, ask if she can get him anything, and says, "Do you want a coffee?" And Kirk says yes. Then we see Dr. McCoy enters, and Kirk starts lamenting about how he wishes he could be somewhere else, kind of retired or on vacation or whatever, and that asks Bones, he's like, "What if I'm wrong? We've been wasting our time. We're just sitting here. We're sitting ducks," things like that. And this conversation kind of reminded me of In the Cage with Pike, where he talks about how so many people have died under his command, and so many. He talks about a recent thing that happened in like Rigel 7 or whatever, and so many people had died, and he just wants to retire from Starfleet and things like that. And he's talking to the Doctor, which, okay, that episode never aired, so they sort of reused that conversation, just rejiggered it a little bit, and that's what it reminded me of. And I thought that was pretty interesting, coming from Kirk, who's all about Starfleet and being on the ship, and you hardly ever see Kirk shaken, but this is him being vulnerable. And there's other I say hardly ever. There are other episodes with Conscience of the King where he's not sure about Kodos, and he doesn't want to condemn a man to death without 100% knowing it's Kodos. And then and Spock is basically saying it's him, Kirk, Jim. He doesn't say that, but whatever, I'm paraphrasing. And this is the great thing about TOS, and anybody that ever watched Star Trek knows this. The dynamic between Kirk, McCoy, and Spock is one of the greatest things ever on not just science fiction television, but television and movies. And you see it throughout the movies where they're constantly back and forth, like trying to figure out things. And you get a good one here. And uh, Bones starts to lament about how in the galaxy there's like 3 million possible Earth-like planets, or and in the universe there's probably another 3 million or three. I don't know. I mean, obviously now we know that there's billions. So basically, he's saying there's other beings just like us somewhere else, and then we get the famous line. He turns to him and says, "But don't destroy the one named Kirk." Kirk, talking about like things like this are probably happening all over the whole entire universe, but you got to think about yourself and the crew, and just don't don't second guess yourself either. Basically, saying this. Spock. So they're basically staying silent. Like, have you ever seen The Hunt for Red October, where the two subs are kind of passing by each other, and there's a little bit of this in Wrath of Khan, where you're trying to maintain silence. So they're like on the Romulan ship, they're basically whispering. Um, the Enterprise is powered down. Um, the engines are running, but they're keeping minimum. So Spock finishes repairs on that console, and as he gets back up, he accidentally presses a button that sends out a signal, which signals to the Romulan vessel where they are. And Styles gets up and starts to flip out, and Kirk kind of holds him back and says, you know, basically like, shut the fuck up, be quiet. It's okay, it's okay, it's okay. And tells them to reverse course and does another phaser fire in the dark. And the Romulan commander pulls this trick again with the debris, except for this time he tells his Centurion to take one of the old style nuclear weapons and place it into the debris, into one of the tubes, and send it out there. So Spock recognizes this and says that there's a tube encased in metal. They can't identify it, uh, but it's nuclear. And Kirk says to fire on it. So it damages the Enterprise, and knocks the lights out on the bridge. And Kirk turns to Spock and says, "What's the damage?" And Spock says that some circuits have been burnt out, and there's overloads across the whole ship. And they have one phaser bank that's operational. To where Styles says that that was his specialty on a previous ship. So Kirk tells him to get down there. Uh, Spock goes down there to see if he needs any help, and this is another point where he's not racist. He just says, "We don't need help from you, Vulcan." I mean, I guess that's kind of racist, but it's not like overtly like saying the N word or something, Like he just says, "I don't need help from you, Vulcan." But they try to make it out like he's the worst person on the face of the planet. He's Hitler. He's the mustache man. So it's him and the guy that was going to get married at the beginning of the episode. And something goes wrong, and there's a big gas leak. So they pass out, and they get a visual on the Romulan ship. Sulu says this, and um, Kirk orders them to attack, and there's no response from Styles, and he says this over and over, and then Spock realizes there's something wrong, so he goes into the phaser room and fires on the vessel, and then basically saves Styles, and the Romulan vessel is disabled completely. They Kirk says to hail them, and the Romulan commander answers the hail, and he says, "Prepare." He says, "Prepare to abandon your ship, and we will beam your the rest of your crew on board." And the Romulan commander says that he can't do that, and laments to Kirk that another time they could have been friends. He could have called you friend. Um, and throughout the episode, and I didn't really touch on this earlier, but oh, hello, Gavin Blackburn. I didn't touch on this earlier, but throughout the episode, you can tell that the Romulan commander kind of respects Kirk's abilities to kind of think on his feet, and he's very clever, and can figure out their moves and stuff. So then we see Styles in sick bay. Well, basically, the Romulan commander says that it is his duty to go down with the ship, and then the ship explodes. So then we see Styles in the sick bay, and Styles says that if it weren't for Spock, he'd be dead, and Spock has like no emotions about this, but he still thanks Spock, and then the guy that was going to get married ended up dying. And so Kirk goes to the fiance and comforts her. So that's the episode, and it's a 10 out of 10. I think that might be the first 10 out of 10 on this show. There's been ones that have been 8 out of 10, or 9 out of 10, or 9.5 out of 10, I think. This one's a 10 out of 10. It's a classic. The line I talked about, the line about bigotry. It's such a brief line, and it at the time, in the episode, what Styles says, in my opinion, was not bigoted. It was showing maybe a little bit of prejudice, or caution towards Spock, because what if he's a secret spy, whatever. It didn't come off, to me, it didn't sound bigoted. But they use that as an excuse to say Star Trek has always been woke. And those two things aren't, it's not the same. It is not the same. I don't care how many times you tell me that it's the same, it's not. And I can point out other examples of A Private Little War, where I've heard Robert Meyer Burnett talk about this, where two sides are presented. Kirk has his side where he wants to arm the natives, and McCoy doesn't think that's a good idea. And I've had people tell me that there's never any episodes of Star Trek where two sides were presented equally. They always chose one side over another, the writers. and that's just not true. But you can't tell these people anything. They believe they're on the right side of history. They believe they're right, and they will tell you all the time that Star Trek has always been woke. Um, at the end, when the Romulan commander says that at one time, either in another life, we could have been friends, that's a nice sentiment there where it's not like nowadays, right? If you if you're a Republican or you're a libertarian or you're a on the right in any way, and I don't know about our friends across the pond, you're automatically shut down. You should not be listened to. You're a bigot. You're a Nazi. You're whatever, and they cannot ever consider you a friend. And there used to be a time when people could have rational conversations, be on opposite sides of things, and be respectful to each other. Uh, but that time has long since passed, and I don't know. It's going to take a lot for us to get back to that time if we ever can. Um, because I don't, when disagree with people, especially the people that say Star Trek was always woke, I don't hate them. I don't have hate in my heart for them. And I don't see them as like the enemy. I just disagree with them. And, I can back it up with a little bit of evidence, you know. And that's a perfect message for Star Trek. And then they try to tell me that I'm not a Star Trek fan because of that and because I disagree with them. And I don't think that's a fair thing to say to anybody. Uh, I wouldn't say that to them, you know. So, and they say that I miss the message of Star Trek. Well, you're missing the message of Star Trek if you watch this episode and you can't walk away and say, hey, the idea that we could, even though we're enemies, supposedly, or we were enemies in the past, that we can't be respectful towards each other, and we can't say, well, maybe at another time I would have considered you a friend. So there's that. I don't know, Strange New Worlds basically ripped this episode off. I think they did it okay. I don't remember how it was resolved, but it's like they can't come up with their own original ideas. They're constantly saying how we want to get away from old Star Trek and da da da, even with Starfleet Academy. But every episode is like a member berry and a callback to something from the old shows. So which one is it? So anyway, those are my thoughts on Balance of Terror. And feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments below. And I think I said hello to Gavin Blackburn. So now we get to the portion of the night where, in this whole entire time, I missed the launching of Artemis 2. So I'm glad that people were able to join me during such a important event in human history. It saddens me that we stopped going to the moon, that we couldn't build a base on the moon, and we couldn't continue to explore like we originally, like Werner von Braun like we see in For All Mankind and stuff like that. So I'm glad that Um, I'm glad we're doing that. Godspeed to those astronauts, and I hope they come back safe. Gavin Blackburn says, if a show's bad, it's bad. It doesn't matter if the lead is black or white. We all love Cisco because he was in a good show. I agree, but they're making a big deal these days. They make a big deal out of out of the race or the gender of the character. When I watched Deep Space Nine, I didn't care that he was black. It wasn't. I don't care. Like, that's just tell a good story. Um. Anyway, so we have the random episode generator, which is still on Balance of Terror. So tomorrow night at 8 p.m., same time, we got another TOS episode, The Corbinite Maneuver, Season 1, Episode 2. So I will be back tomorrow night to review the Corbinite Maneuver. Another good one, another banger. I want to thank DJ Play Nice and Gavin Blackburn for showing up. I also will be joining, or not joining, but I'll be on Admiral Teague's in the chat tonight, on his channel, which is coming up in, I think, a few minutes. Yeah, and make sure you hit the like, do the bells, and all that stuff. I don't know what happened with Anti-Derivative Jill's channel. My channel's not even on YouTube's radar. It's not that big, but it wouldn't be. I wouldn't be surprised if I got dinged with something stupid as well. So, and I've noticed that sometimes I won't get notifications from people that I have put notifications on for, and I don't know if maybe I didn't put all notifications or whatever. But anyway, have a good night, everyone. I also want to thank people that are lurking, if you are lurking, and people that come across this in the future. I'll be back here tomorrow night.